We're going to show you how to install our E-Z-Go long travel kit on a 2001 and a half and newer TXT car. You want to jack the car up, put it on jack stands, remove the wheels and tires. And then the first step is to remove the rivet holding the rocker panel, and then remove the two stock bolts holding the rocker sill, which will allow you to remove the rocker panel from the car. Now pull the rocker back and then drill through the rivet that's holding the body on the front of the cow, and also the rivets that go up along the side and the front of the cow, and do the other side, which will allow you to remove the cow from the car. The next step is to remove the protective dust mat. There's two plastic Christmas trees in each glove box. You want to remove those. There's one in the middle, and once you got those out, remove the dust mat. You will not be reusing this. The next step is to remove the dust caps from the hubs on the driver and passenger side. Remove the cotter pin and the stock nut that's holding the hub, and remove the hubs from both sides of the car. You want to save the hardware for reinstallation. The next step is to remove the stock shock mounts from the car with a number 14 wrench. Do both driver and passenger side, and you will not be reusing this hardware. Once you got the top of the shocks disassembled, put the stock nuts back on just a couple threads. This is going to help keep your frame in place until you're ready to remove it from the car. Now you want to pull back the rubber floor mat and pull it back over the pedal, which is going to expose the bolts that are holding the leaf springs on the front of the car. Now, using a 5/8 wrench or ratchet, remove the nuts that are holding the front of the leaf springs on the car from both driver and passenger side. Okay. Yep. Now you're going to unhook the steering from the car using a 13mm wrench. You want to save this bolt for reinstallation, and you also want to save the leaf spring bolts. Now the front suspension is ready to come off the car. Have two people holding the front axle and shocks. Remove the stock nuts from the shocks, and you can completely remove the front suspension from the car. Now you're ready to install the subframe to the stock leaf spring mounts using the stock nuts, bolts, and leaf spring plates. You do not want to securely tighten at this time. Just get it started and leave it loosely installed. The next step is to drill out the existing two holes on the passenger and driver side of the shock mount plate to 3/8 inch. Now you want to loosely install the J plate to the subframe. The first bolt you want to use is the 3/8x1 button head, and it is coming from the back side, and it goes in the second hole from the driver's side as shown. The lock nut is going to the front, and then the remaining 3/8x1 goes through the front, and you want to loosely install your lock nuts on the back side. Once you have the 4 bolts started, you want to securely install the J plate to the subframe only. Leave the top bolts loosely installed for now. Now you want to drill through the frame using the stock center hole in the J plate as a guide. You want to put a 3/8 hole, and then you want to install the 3/8 nut and bolt and securely install the 3 bolts on the top of the J plate. Now that you have the J plate installed to the subframe, securely install the subframe to the car. Go ahead and tighten these bolts. All 6 of them. The next step is to install the shock to the J plate using the supplied 7/16 by 2.5 bolt tapered spacer, and we recommend with the new shocks that you put it on the next to the top hole on the inside. Your adjustments will be in the threaded body of the shock. We'll give you different height settings. This is our new in-house shock. You want to securely tighten this to both driver and passenger side. The next step is to install your bottom A-arms. And notice how the bend goes to the front and the straight bar goes to the back to the bottom of the subframe using the 7/16 by 1 1/4 bolts and lock nuts. You want to securely install these to both the driver and passenger side. And the tabs for your shock mount go up.
Back of the A-arm.
Now we're ready to install the shock to the bottom A-arm using the 7/16 by 5 1/2 bolt. You want to run the bolt through the A-arm, then the shock, and then the 1 3/8 spacer goes to the back. And go ahead and securely install this to both the driver and passenger side. The next step is to install the top A-arms to the subframe. Make sure you use the outer holes on the top subframe using the 7/16 by 1 1/4 bolts and lock nuts. And make sure the bent arm goes to the front of the car and the straight part of the arm goes to the rear of the car. Securely installed to both the driver and passenger side. Now we're ready to install the spindles to the car. You want to take the 1/2x7 bolt, slide on your Heim spacer with the flat edge to the bolt end. You want to take your bolt down through the top A-arm, your spindle down through the bottom A-arm, and then your other Heim spacer with the coned edge towards the Heim, and securely install with the lock nut. Now notice we have the driver's side. The axle comes out and your steering arm goes to the back and towards the inside. Go ahead and securely install the driver and passenger side spindles. Now you're ready to reinstall the stock hubs. We already did, but take and put a little bit of grease on the axle using the stock hub, the stock bearing, stock nut, and stock cotter pin. Securely install the hub to the car and then reinstall the dust cover to both driver and passenger side. Now we're going to get the steering box ready for installation. You want to take the steering extension, and there's a small end and a large end. The small end goes to the box, and you want to take the bolt that comes with the extension, the pinch bolt, attach that and just start the nut. You do not want to tighten the nut at this time. Now we're going to show you how to center the steering box before we put it on the car. You want to rotate this the whole way to one side. And once it's done, we have it the whole way to the one side.
3
You're
rotations.
going to take it the whole way to the other side.
3 rotations. So now you go 1 rotation and a half of a rotation. Right there. 1 and
We
a
are
half.
centered now. And then with the 4-inch bolts, you want to take and put the supplied spacer plate onto the steering box. And now you're ready to put the steering box onto the subframe, but we are not going to put the nuts on just at this time yet. Now we're ready to install the universal to the steering column. You want to make sure that your steering wheel is straight. So as soon as you got it straight, you're going to come down, and from the driver's side, you're going to pull the steering box out slightly from the holes, and you're going to slide the universal onto the stock shaft, and then put your steering box back in the holes, and then you can securely tighten with the lock nuts and securely tighten your universal. Just to review the steering with you, you can see we got the spacer plate in front of the steering box. You want to securely tighten the pinch bolt on the bottom of the steering shaft, and make sure you securely tighten the pinch bolt on the top of the steering shaft, and with the supplied lock nuts, securely install the steering box to the subframe. Now that you got the steering completely tight and assembled, we're ready to install the tie rod ends into the spindle. Now we're going to show you on this one as he puts it in here, and you can see if I'm standing straight, the front of the tires will be towed out. So we're going to help you preset that right now to save you some adjustment. What he's going to do is, if he loosens the jam nut, And as he lengthens that tie rod, and he reinstalls it, now we are closer. What we're going to want to end up being is this front section is going to be about an 1/8 inch closer than the rear section. And then you want to go ahead and install the supplied castle nut with cotter pin and securely tighten with a 3/4 inch wrench. Do this to both driver and passenger side. Now you can go ahead and install your hubs and your wheels and tires. I want to show you here how you adjust the front end. We have the car still up in the air, but you're going to want to do this once it's down on the ground and bearing weight. But you're going to measure across. Say if you pick a tread, you measure across from the driver's side to passenger side. That measurement should be an 1/8 to 1/4 inch narrower than if you would measure across on the rear portion of the front tires on the same tread. So we want it to be towed in. So he's going ahead and he's going to take the measurement, and then to get that toe in, if you loosen the jam nut on both the driver and passenger side tie rod, you can see that there is a flat on the tie rods. You can take a wrench and you can turn both tie rods, and it's going to push the tires out or pull it in until you get to that 1/8 to 1/4 inch toe in. Then just remember to retighten your jam nut when you're done. And you can also adjust the camber on this if you want. You can loosen the jam nuts on the high ends. You got to take it apart, and you can turn them in or out, and you can get any kind of camber setting you want. So it is completely adjustable. So once you have the front end done, you can go ahead and install your little bumper that comes with it, with the supplied nuts and bolts. And then you want to reassemble the front cow and the side rockers and the floor mat the same way you took it off, and then you're done and you're ready to move to the rear. Now we're going to install the rear lift. We have the body off this car. You don't have to take the body off to install the lift kit, but it makes it easier for you guys to see what's going on. You want to jack the car up, put the rear of the frame on jack stands, and put a car jack underneath the rear end housing. All right, remove the wheels and tires, and then with a 9/16 ratchet or socket, remove the stock nut that's holding the stock shock from the bottom shock mount. You want to save this nut for reinstallation, and then compress your shock to remove it from the shock mount. Using a 9/16 socket, remove the 4 nuts that's holding the stock ISO mount. Now that you've got the U-bolts off the ISO mount on both the driver and passenger side, you want to remove the ISO mount from the axle along with the rubber bushing. And the stock shock mount. Using a 9/16 ratchet and wrench, remove the leaf spring from the rear leaf spring mount. Save these bolts for reinstallation. Do both the driver and passenger side. Using a 9/16 and an 11/16, remove the bolt that's holding the front of the leaf spring to the car on both the driver and passenger side. You want to save these bolts for reinstallation. Now that you have the rear leaf springs removed, use the car jack to drop the rear. Jack the rear end up high enough and pull the driver's side brake cable out of the stock mount. It's not going to go back in the mount. Once the rear lift is done, you want to take and wire tie this to the frame. Now you're going to reinstall the leaf springs to the stock front mount using the stock hardware, and you're going to install it to the rear mount using the stock hardware. Do not tighten it this time until you get the whole rear lift into place. This lift kit will work with both standard leaf springs and heavy-duty leaf springs. Now you take the new rear risers, sit on top of the axle, use the center pin on the axle as a guide, and the center hole is actually going to go up into the bolt of the leaf spring. Do this to both driver and passenger side. Take the new supplied U-bolts and bring up through the bottom of the riser and around the axle to both the driver and passenger side as shown. Using the car jack, bring the rear end up to center your center pin on the leaf spring with your riser, and then using the stock shock mount, install to the top of the leaf spring with the center pin in the center, and you're going to tighten with the supplied nuts, and then reinstall your shock to the new shock mount using the stock nut. Now that you have everything in place, you want to securely tighten the rear lift. And make sure you use a torque sequence and you show about the same amount of threads in each bolt. And then securely tighten your shock to the shock mount. To both driver and passenger side, and then the last step is to securely install your leaf springs. Install your wheels and tires, double check all your nuts and bolts securely tightened, and you're done.